Good morning or good afternoon. We're just waiting for some additional attendees to log in. I see the numbers increasing. Let's just give them another minute. Okay, I think we still keep people joining, so let's give it a second. All right, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to Weathering the Storm, Navigating Hurricane Liabilities, Insurance Claims, and Planning. My name is George LaRue. I am the Sales Director with KWPMC, and I am delighted to be here this afternoon with this group. I am joined today by two colleagues, Sherwin Lewis with our Corporate Chief Engineer, as well as our expert panelist, Dan Odess, with our claims and with our claims department. Before we dive into this session, let's go over some housekeeping items. This session will last approximately an hour, and we will have Q&A chat open. So any questions that come up throughout the program, please feel free to type them in, and we will do our best to answer them. It is also important to share that the information provided throughout the webinar and subsequent recordings is intended for information purpose only and should not be taken as professional advice. So Dan, let's start with you. Why don't you share a little bit about yourself and your experience with the subject that we're about to discuss?
All right, George, thanks so much. And thanks to everyone that's joining us here today and the illustrious panel. It's an honor to be here and talk about an important issue. Obviously, they've already just came out with the names for these storms. So as part of the lead for KW's claims team, we want to make sure that you understand this integrated service and the value add that we bring to your associations. We have the experience that's necessary in order to navigate the new insurance process, and it's certainly new. There's a lot of nuances and new policy forms, endorsements, statutes, legislation, and other things that you need to understand and how to navigate as a fiduciary and as you work with your board members through making decisions that are going to most certainly impact the financial success or failure of your association. So I'm looking forward to sharing all of this information with you all. As we have managed more than $1 billion of the loss, we've handled thousands of community associations claims, and we look forward to providing you insight into what is going on in the insurance industry.
Great. Thank you. Sherwin Lewis, our Corporate Director of Engineering. You can
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you, George. It's also a pleasure to be here with everyone. And to Daniel's point, sharing good information. As you know, failure to plan is planning to fail. So this is part of the plan to succeed during these times of events. So the purpose of this is to help ensure that we're planning efficiently and utilizing information from the past, but also new information or new techniques or knowledge to plan better for the future. So thank you for being here.
Wonderful. So thank you both for carving time out today. I know that everyone's busy, but to kick things off, we'll begin with a poll with some questions. You should be seeing them up on the screen shortly. I would ask that everybody joins them and everybody on the call, if you could take your time, fill them out, that would be great. I know we have some out-of-state participants who have not experienced a storm, so it's important to understand how to explain or what to explain today. Fortunately for us on the east coast of Florida, we've missed a few storms in the last few years. Unfortunately for our properties out west, you know, they've seen a little bit more of an active season. So, okay, we'll give it another 30 seconds while we fill these out. Some great responses coming in, which is great. Thank you, everybody. All right. So, looking through these results, So no one on this call has not experienced a storm. So 100% participation. That is great. All right. So first things first, Sherwin, from your experience working with as many condos and HOA properties as you've been involved with, what does an effective hurricane preparedness plan actually look like? And what are the key elements communities should have in place before the hurricane season begins?
But first and foremost, having a formal hurricane plan is critical. Having checklists within that plan that are tailored towards your property. Every property, as you know, have differences, whether it's the size of the building, how many stories, the equipment, all those things plays an affect the plan itself. So you need to understand your building, uh, coordinate with your team, whether the manager, the maintenance, even your housekeeping. They all play a part in preparing this plan. Having good emergency contacts, vendors, evacuation procedures, all those items need to be reviewed annually because things may change, whether it's a construction nearby, may change how you evacuate your building if needed. Take those items into account. Any changes of additional road work, all those nuances will affect your plan. So a comprehensive plan needs to look not just at what's physically in your building, but things that could affect other areas of the evacuation if needed, or even the functionality of a building. So those are items you can start off with a good comprehensive review of your plan or building out of the plan.
Okay. Dan, anything you can add to that point?
Well, ensuring access. I mean, functionality is of the utmost importance, obviously, and focusing on that, ensuring that that plan includes a comprehensive plan for gaining access to every single room in your building is important. And I mean room, including the units themselves. Particularly if you have a lot of out of town residents that this is not their primary residence. Waiting for them to get back and assess the situation in their own unit is not an appropriate action when dealing with this type of loss. It only festers itself and get worse. So we want to make sure we've access. Probably one of the number one things that we run into on the claim side of things is a lack of access. So we want to make sure that there's a comprehensive plan there, whether it's getting keys, getting permissions, if there's digital components that restrict access, if there's power in the building, those things will limit it. Making sure that you understand where every door and every lock is, and making sure that you have what you need in order to be able to get through those doors, to be able to assess a situation quite quickly. You see also massive disasters, as you mentioned, George, the hurricanes, where entire balcony areas were missing from buildings, but they actually could not get through the door of the units to go in there in order to do any sort of emergency mitigation. So access is very important. It could become very costly if not. And I know that's and it's definitely a safety component as well. Safety first, obviously making sure everyone is healthy and ready. Everyone's healthy and safe, and access is a big part of that.
I could relate to that personally. I know there was a storm where I had to walk up to the 11th floor, and it was an afterthought. The elevators were down, and we didn't have our emergency backup generator had run out of fuel. So clearly, the building I was living in was not prepared. So agreed that access is important. So Dan, from your point of view, what could you tell board members that they should be doing in preparation for a claim before the storm?
Well, one of the first. Go ahead. Sorry, George.
No, go ahead. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
The first thing that comes to mind, and most people talk about it, so I'll just mention it, is documenting the current condition of the property. The thing is that's usually a lot of talk and a lot less action. And oftentimes when we ask for, hey, do you have any photographs, videos, or anything of the property prior to the storm, we get 3 or 4 pictures, maybe some narrative video, which is worse than anything that you'd probably provide me. And because again, a video is difficult because you have to watch it, you have to go through it. It takes an enormous amount of time to kind of get to where you need to be, or get the information you need. And also providing a narrative is unnecessary, and it can usually lead to some issues in the claims process themselves. Maybe you stated somewhere, or someone states something that's not entirely factually true, or it can be taken out of context. Photographs are the number one thing. Document the current condition of the property, but truly do it, and try to get to every single fenestration opening, meaning windows or doors. Try to get on every balcony. Try to take every elevation picture. Get on top of the roof. Get to the highest point of the roof. If you have access to drone services and things like that, making sure that you take some aerial pictures of it is really, really important. Also, too, if you have mechanical systems inside your property, take pictures of the readouts on those things so that you know where the kind of like the normal situation would be, where the pressure should be, where the temperature should be. If those things have to show some erratic readings or whatever else, that may be a telltale sign that there's an issue there early on in the claims process, so we can immediately notice it. Separate from just simply documenting the current condition of the property, the number two thing I think is most important is getting an actual copy of your insurance policy. Most people think that's just simply by making a phone call or sending an email or text message over to the broker, and they send you a copy of a policy. What we're talking about is the certified copy of the policy. Very different than a copy of a policy from a broker. A certified copy of policy, if you use those words when making the request to your broker or wholesaler or to the insurance company directly, will actually come with a signed, sworn statement from the insurance company swearing to the fact that this is your full and complete policy. That is more important today than ever. Now, I've been saying this for almost 15 plus years to associations that they need to obtain this type of policy. But oddly enough, when I was once upon saying it, there was very few endorsements or additional limitations in the policies that we were looking at. Nowadays, most of your policies are comprised of endorsements, meaning that there's all of these additional forms with all these different codes and limitations, and you need to make sure that you have all of them. And guess what? If they send you a certified copy of the policy and it excludes one of those endorsements, well, what the law says is that then they can't enforce that limitation or exclusion. Now, they may try to, obviously, but the reality is that you have asked them to swear to the fact that this is a full and complete copy. Well, with the delays in getting your policies these days, it's really important to make this request up front and immediately when placing your insurance. You shouldn't wait for storm season. This is if you're having any sort of renewal or you're waiting for your upcoming renewal the next month or two, go ahead and ask for this year's certified copy. Go through the process of it. The first copy should always be free. Some insurance companies, if they're wholesaling the product, whatever else, may charge you for a second copy. But when you get it, the next thing is make a copy of it and store it electronically, digitally, so everybody has access to it. Because again, that is the holy grail right there of coverages, the financial tool that you purchase that you're spending an enormous amount of money today for, and also covers less. It's important that you have an actual copy of it so that you can understand or have what you need in order to be able to get coverage when you have those damages. I think those are probably the two most important. I know we're going to cover a lot of things here, George, so I don't want to take too much of the microphone and whatever else, but I think those are the two top items. I would say when you're doing this planning process, document the current condition of property and making sure you have a certified copy of it is really, really important. The last piece is education, and I'll leave on this, is that making sure that you spend time at one of your upcoming board meetings at some point in time talking about what type of insurance you have, coverages, the limitations between an association's coverage versus a unit owner coverage, particularly if you have tenants in your building. They're usually the ones that cause the most problems for us when dealing with access and coverage and issues and damage and reconstruction and rebuilding. And I will tell you, in recent history, we've dealt with a lot of issues when dealing with tenant occupied units. So it's important that you get that information out, host the meetings, detail the meetings, and then make sure that the information is disseminated and out to the unit owners. Communication is key, not only before the loss, obviously after the claim, but we usually see that communication kind of fall off as we're heading into the season, and a lack of updates and information as it goes through renewals. But it's really important that you educate your unit owners and your board members as property managers, if you're listening, making sure that they're aware of what coverage they have, who the insurance company's with, and some of those details. And it's because we all evacuate. We all leave the building, the premises, whatever else, or if we don't, maybe some people do, and that person that does is the one with the knowledge information and knows where to get it and everything else. Everyone should be understand what the plan is, where to get that information. Again, all part of education.
Very, very excellent point.
Okay.
Sure, were you going to say something or?
No, I was going to just add on, but more on the preventive side of things regarding the preparation. And remember, as I said, plan to succeed. So part of the preparation is the preventive maintenance of the property as a whole. For a board member to understand what is being done, for instance, what type of equipment you have is critical in terms of the preparation. Are you conducting the preventive maintenance of your roofing system, your drainage system, ensuring that you inspect the balconies, as mentioned before, having access to do this beforehand? You may notice that there's already damage or some type of deficiency there that could become problematic. Noting those things, even window seals, exterior penetration, uh, your drainage system, sump pumps in the garage, if you have those, all those items need to be inspected and maintained. Make sure they're fully functional beforehand, ensuring that your generators are fueled up to the max capacity at that point. Make sure your fire pumps are already tested and exercised. Ensuring your emergency lights are checked beforehand. You don't want to do this in the middle of a storm or in the middle of a situation. Same thing with your landscaping. There are times we need to make sure your landscapers are pruned so they don't become projectile or things that could fall into the drain. Part of the process we have taken on is learning how to cover drains so they don't become clogged or filled with debris during a high storm or a high concentrated of water going into those drains because they usually bring debris, which cause flooding. All those are critical items beforehand that the team should be taking on. So from a board perspective, when you're having discussions with your manager, these are questions you can ask. Are you taking note of these things? Are you documenting them beforehand? As Dan mentioned, if we have these information beforehand, it helps with claims later on in clarifying that we have taken every foreseeable steps to mitigate any type of damage. So if there is damage, no one can say, well, we did nothing at all. So you're clarifying it by not just documentation, but checklists, ensuring that checklists are comprehensive enough to cover your property and customized to your property. So all those are critical items. That's it.
Understood. And you're absolutely right. Very good points. This next question is coming into us from one of the attendees, and I'm going to say for both of you. So when boards are reviewing storm readiness plans, where do you most often see gaps between what is on paper and what is actual reality? So Sherwin, you want to take it first?
Sure. So part of the reality is understanding there's a misunderstanding at time as to who make the call. For instance, we may not make the call as for an evacuation. The city and county does. We may believe that our building, there was no damage to our property at last call, but we don't make that call. We don't want to make those calls in terms of managers or even board members. I wouldn't suggest you make an evacuation call. If the county and city says that we should evacuate, there's reasons for it. There's science behind why they're giving us those orders. Also, understanding of your property capacity. Today, we could have a simple category one, and your property does extremely well. Tomorrow, we could have a tropical storm where it doesn't. So, understanding those differences, what that mean to your property. For instance, you may have some pumps that could only do, being a little scientific, maybe 100 gallons. But now a tropical storm is bringing in 500 gallons. That changes everything. You don't have the capacity to move that water. Things like sandbags. Well, we have sandbags. Well, it can only work for a particular amount of raindrops. If you have a heavy storm, that will change things. So understanding capacity, understanding the staff that you have. You may have only 3 people staff, 5-person staff. All those makes a difference from having a 10-person staff. How will they react? And we also have to take into account those individuals may not be able to get there or may not be able to come to work at a particular time. All those factors, I think, are gaps in the plan. So we need to come up with contingencies. And I think that's what we make have the largest gap is not having enough contingencies in case this didn't happen, in case we don't have this amount of employees. Those contingencies, I think, are the biggest gaps.
So, I mean, sounds like understanding whether it's a wet storm or a dry storm, that is a key factor to how a building should be prepared.
Absolutely. I mean, as state, if you have a tropical storm, could be extremely wet, and with that now brings a different response. For instance, a tropical storm, you may utilize more sandbags at that point, but your pumps could be overloaded. At a Category 1 dry storm, you may have minimal water to deal with at that point, but you're dealing with a lot of wind effects. So now you're dealing with more tie downs and projectiles. So depending on the storm, you have to respond. It's not just we have a hurricane storm and the same response we did last month, we do this month. Things may change. And having that understanding will help you prepare better or respond better.
Understood. Dan, anything you'd like to add?
Yeah, I got 2 points. First one is communication, reality versus the plan. There's, a lack of access to internet may cripple your ability to be able to send emails or text messages. I know there's a lot of community association WhatsApp chat groups out there. While sometimes we hate them or love them, that could be a means during a storm to create one. If you do have updated and accurate contact information for your unit owners, just the speed of communication and getting to them, particularly for out of town unit owners or tenants that leave and evacuate. I think the idea of reality versus the plan itself in testing it and having that plan B for getting the communications out and make sure that you're in touch and they can reach you as well, because these concerned unit owners and as well as tenants are entitled to information in the moment and want updates. And it's very nerve wracking. Just put your step into their shoes. Be very nerve wracking as a unit owner not to know what the current condition of the property. Particularly, we've had instances where a building appeared on the local news or actually on national news in one instance, and several unit owners were able to identify their units, which were heavily damaged, but they could not get a hold of the manager. They couldn't get a hold of the board members, and they were really panicking about what was going on. So just making sure you have some alternative ways in which to communicate, because if one isn't working, having an efficient way of doing it another way. I think that also goes for the staff as managers and board members, making sure you can communicate effectively with Sherwin and other people that may be on the ground and helping, because maybe you need a contractor to help you do something and you can't get a hold of the one that you signed that agreement with that said they would be there 72 hours, and you need you need a plan B. So being able to connect into your network should be part of the communication and making sure that you can do that. Again, reality versus the actual plan itself. Collection of incurred expenses. Sherwin mentioned many things about things that may cost money today in order to prepare the building in the event that something would occur. Some of those were just some things that you should just basically do year round. Others were stuff that you do in the immediate run up to a category storm that may devastate an area. In that situation, as you run up to a storm, those costs could and most often should be recoverable if your property sustains a covered loss. Okay, so which is a very, very important issue. And the collection of incurred expenses is really more just the collection of just data and information following a storm. What is the current condition and status of the property, but also what are you doing and what is it costing you to do these things in order to be able to mitigate your issues. So it's the run up of the storm, and it's also the immediate mitigation where we see a lot of problems. Now, I know I've seen KW's plans and the boilerplates and the things that we see in there, and I know it talks about it. I see Sherman shaking his head there. But there's a difference between the reality, the plan itself, and the reality of the situation is that take action, be proactive about it, and literally you should have a storm folder. The moment that storm starts to threat, you're in the cone, and you start to see overtime It's a big one that gets missed a lot. And then we're going back and trying to put records together and figure out who was there, who wasn't there. And don't expect it just to be your A player. Sometimes your A player is the first one to leave. Maybe it's your B player. So don't make assumptions about who's actually going to stick around for this thing. But also making sure that you have a process for checking your staff in and out of the property, as well as your unit owners or tenants or whatever is going on, and keeping record of those things, because it's important to know what is going on at the property at that time, particularly if you have limited communication abilities. But those expenses can be tremendous and also be a shortfall. And with shortened statute of limitations, which I know, George, we're going to get to in a moment's time, it's really important that you get this information sooner rather than later, with today's insurance market and where kind of how the claims are being managed and handled by these insurance companies. So making sure that expenses, those extra sandbags, the garbage bags, the PPE gear, the face mask, the gloves, all of these small little things, you run to Home Depot to pick up an extra bottle of Windex or cleaning solution, keep that receipt, mark it, who bought it, why do they buy it, what is it for, write it right on there, and then scan it, copy, take a picture of your phone, make a digital copy of it, and then have an electronic folder and have a physical folder for all of those expenses. What I recommend is on the physical folder, right on the back, start making a ledger. And then when you have a chance, sit down and then transpose that ledger into some sort of Excel spreadsheet or some Google Docs, which are even better, because you can immediately share that Google Doc with so many different people. So these are kind of all those strategies. I know I'm throwing a lot of different things at you, but that expense, should you have a covered loss, like a hurricane, and blown out windows or whatever it may be from those storms, whether it's dry or wet, can be recoverable and should be recoverable, included in the claim, including the overtime hours that your staff puts in to protect your building and to assist you in recovering from it. So again, that's probably one of the biggest issues. Those two are the biggest issues we see: communication and the collection of incurred expenses. While both of them are definitely in the plan, the reality of the situation sometimes is that we get busy, we forget, we don't do something, or we don't have access to something. It's making sure that we have a plan B there or a strategy to dealing with that situation.
So you mentioned something about testing the plan. Can you elaborate how do you put a plan, a hurricane preparedness plan, to a test?
Well, I'll be honest with you. One of the coolest things I've seen using AI. Okay, I actually took a plan for it's actually a commercial. It's a multifamily property operator. He gave us his plan, and we actually dumped it into two different. We used Gemini and we were using ChatGPT, and we asked both of them to strategize and helping us develop a secondary strategy to dealing with situations where you're dealing with high tenant occupancy and a hurricane-prone area. And so there's many different nuances to it, and it's really just thinking about the alternative strategy to whatever the clear path is. So the clear path is that we have communication. It was a relatively dry storm, but we did sustain some damages. Okay, these are the things that we would do. These are the people that we would call, and that's pretty straightforward. But every time that you write down something saying send email to unit owners with updates on a weekly basis, okay, well, what happens if your access to emails on your phone, it's limited? Is there alternative? Would be WhatsApp or some other type of multifaceted communication technology, right? What is the frequency of that communication? And also, what are the limitations of that information? How much information are you going to provide? And then, and making sure you educate your unit owners about that ahead of time, because I do see a lot of fighting going on in the board meetings following storms, right? You're not telling us this, this, and this. But if you clearly define what information is going to get disseminated in those points in time, and how it was going to be, if it's via text message, it's only going to say this. If it's via email, it's going to provide that. If it's in writing, it'll be this. You can strategize around those things, and there's a lot of things that we see, George, is that there's many different ways to communicate these days, and because of cell phones and technology, and particularly with the access to cell phone communication or cellular devices is significantly better in today's storms than they were, let's say, 5 years ago.
Yes.
The federal government working with private companies is doing such a better job at it. They're setting up mobile towers instantly. They have them literally staged right with the FP&L trucks. They're ready to go in there. And then you see like Elon Musk's company, like with the Starlink, go in there, and they're doing a lot of efforts in sending those signals right into the area. So it's not as limiting. It's not as big of an issue, but it is going to be limiting because of the volume of people that instantly are on there that want to be influencers. Okay, that are uploading videos and pictures, and not really your emergency services stuff, which really should be dedicated to. So you're kind of contending with the influencer, and so you just got to make sure that you have that plan B. There's many things that we can kind of break down to, and I think I mentioned a few of them here.
Great, thank you. We're getting plenty of questions about post-storm, so we may need to start transitioning into post-storms. Before that, I did want to ask a question that had come into us prior to our going live. So once a storm warning is issued, what steps should property management teams, and boards take to activate the emergency response plan and keep residents and staff informed? So how soon in your eyes, how soon should we activate our response plan?
But from my end, I would tell you, as soon as you're aware that there's a storm coming, the plan should automatically be activated. But there are stages to this. Stages, whether it's 72 hours, 48 hours, 24 hours, there should be a plan that delineates out in those phases. Uh, for instance, the first phase is an inspection. Someone should inspect the property because you may have inspected the property a week before. Things may have changed. Things may have come loose. So you want to make sure we're visibly looking at these items, ensuring that your fuel is up to date, ensuring that the furniture, whether it's on the pool deck or other places, are secure or removed or stored properly, inspecting the property from a visual standpoint to make sure that the residents who are in town have moved their furniture in. For those who are not, as Daniel stated, we may need to have entry to remove those furniture to ensure that they don't become projectile. Um, Understanding where you have debris, could be garbage or things that you're doing currently, you may need to change those staging at that point to make sure they're moved or removed. Call your trash company to remove them earlier than maybe scheduled. Understanding that you may have open projects such as facade repair. What will that mean to your property? What preparation may be necessary to ensure that they don't become a huge deficiency during the storm? For instance, it could be create a leak. How do we safeguard the property from there? It may be temporary sealing of those areas before the storm hit. All those things need to be taken into account before the storm. So immediate response, immediate preparation. But I want to also piggyback on the how do you I would say practice or review or rehearse a plan. A plan is rehearsed in several ways, from the housekeeper to the maintenance team to the manager, all the way up to the board member. Should review what steps, who's responsible, what is my role, what is your role, what should be expected. Because as Daniel mentioned, if we lose communication, I cannot now communicate what I need you to do. If we already discuss what my responsibilities are, I will do my task. But if I don't know, at that point, I may be doing something outside of what's necessary. So having that discussion beforehand, collectively as a team, there are things the board may need to do, such as sign off. Like, let's get those things discussed beforehand. Let's get those signatures out so that we can do the necessary job to ensure that we're responding appropriately, efficiently, and on time. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Sherwin. Dan, anything to add to Sherwin's point?
Yeah, I think it's a tough. You're in a tough spot as a property manager as well as a board member. You don't want to overreact, but you also obviously want to be ready, and having an agreement amongst the decision makers ahead of time of what you're going to do at each phase, and identifying clearly defining what that phase is, and everybody buying in on it, will make it a lot easier to explain or justify the situation down the road. And because the fact of the matter is, if the storm doesn't hit and you spend money preparing and doing things, it's very easy for someone to become very critical of you if there's not an agreement amongst the decision makers, and it wasn't clearly defined and communicated to the unit owners as well as the tenants and the property. So just getting an agreement amongst the decision makers that, hey, this is what we're going to do. I think it varies from property to property, because some are extremely tall, thin properties. Some are very large, widespread, multiple buildings, systems everywhere. I think it's just such a unique situation, and going through that plan and rehearsing it, as you mentioned, is so important, because you'll be able to identify shortcomings in the plan, as well as things you might want to avoid, or things you want to phase out or phase later into the plan, as it becomes more of a serious thing. Things that are going to cost more money, things that are going to be more extensive and disruptive to the process. I think there just needs to be an agreement amongst it, particularly for your property, and something that needs to be that's something that you can rehearse. And I think it's really important that you understand they're doing predictions farther out now, and they like to believe that those predictions are better. But statistically speaking, you can argue it either way. Okay, but I mean, the Weather Channel is getting a hell of a lot of ad revenue out of it, so I don't think they're going to stop. And if they can predict this thing 30 days out, they're going to start doing it just so they can sell more ads, right? So, but just know, social media is a hype machine too. So everybody gets so excited. Everybody wants to run ahead of the plan and be proactive and think that's in the best interest, but it may not be, because it could disrupt, the quality living situation for unit owners for absolutely no reason. So you have to strike a balance, and that balance, I believe, is with the decision makers agreeing and also communicating the expectation of what we're going to do and when we're going to do it and how we're going to do it, and really tailoring that to your current situation, and just really not believing that it's a one size fit all. If you just think that you can just take the boilerplate plan and just institute it and follow the emails and everything else and avoid liability, I think the running to legal counsel to figure out how to protect myself from claims is also something a lot of people fall victim to. And I heed you warning, when you're doing, when you're dealing tax planning, and if you talk to a lawyer and you talk to an accountant, they're going to give you two different opinions. Just like if you talk to an insurance agent, they'll give you a completely separate opinion as well. The reality of it is that it's not a one size fits all. This is not so much about legal liability as it is about the health, life, and safety of your unit owners, but also about communication and setting proper expectations, so that people can make decisions for themselves as to whether to stay, to leave, to comply with an evacuation, to not to comply. There's been a lot of conversation around, can I force them to leave? Can I chain the doors? And all this other the stuff that I hear all the time, and which bring up legal questions and nuances to it. But there's so much information out there at this point regarding those specifics. We can certainly share more of that as well.
Excellent. Excellent point. I know at KWPMC, one of our standards is to present each of the association's hurricane procedures before the start of hurricane season and get the board to sign off on them, particularly because once we are in that cone and we know that a storm's coming, even if it's not a direct hit, it's expected that we're going to have those high winds and rains and whatnot. So it's too late if we start planning and asking for permission at that point. Therefore, getting the board to agree on when we're going to close the pool, when we're going to remove furniture from the pool decks is definitely important. So moving on to a question from, wow, we have a lot of questions.
Great.
Justin from St. Pete. How should associations handle storm-related repairs when they are still waiting on insurance claim response? And is there anything they should be careful not to do in order to avoid affecting the claim? You talked about keeping receipts, but what is allowed for versus potentially impacting their claim? Dan?
Guess I'll take this one, Sherman.
Yes, I love that too.
I don't know how much Sherman can answer that one.
Didn't want to
All
touch it.
right. I will say this is actually a rather complicated claim in today's current insurance environment because of policy conditions that may have been added to your policies through endorsement. We have one particular insurance company out there that basically says that if you're going to spend more than X dollars, you have to give us notice within 72 hours of your intent to spend it. You have to provide us all the documents in support of it. And then we're going to go through a review process and then tell you whether or not we're in agreement with it. If we're not, we're going to tell you how to change it. And by the way, if you don't do all of that, you're capped at X dollars no matter how much more you spend. And then on another part of the policy, it says you have a duty and obligation to mitigate, stop your damages from getting worse, and protect your property. It's quite the what we like to say illusory issue, which is that on one hand, I have to protect my property from more damage, which logically makes sense. And on the other side, it's saying that I have to wait for your review process, even though I have this licensed professional at my property with all of this team of people checking and doing all those things, telling me I have to do this and I have to do this now. If I don't, they're going to go to another property. So you're in a bit of a conundrum when it comes to some of these endorsements. So the first step is look closely at your policy. Look very closely at your policy, making sure you have a certified copy of your policy and making sure you looked at every one of your endorsements into looking for the language in there regarding your duties in the event of a loss or what you're supposed to do in a post-loss situation. I tell managers all the time, well, as soon as you find that section, if you need help finding it, let me know. The KW claims team will certainly walk you through and how to identify all of those sections that are related to this issue, and we will imprint it. Print out that section and stick it in your drawer and make sure that you have it handy. It's almost like a checklist. It's an automatic checklist of your contractual obligations to your insurance company to ensure that you have done everything you're supposed to do so that triggers their obligation or should trigger their obligation to pay you. And that really is where you need to start. Now, the other side of that, though, is, as I mentioned, is mitigation. Now, as you move to do the mitigation and protecting your interest in your association and starting those repairs and what you should do and how far you should go, the first thing and the most essential part is health, life, and safety of your unit owners or board members included, and making sure that the property is secure and that no one can actually hurt themselves, right? And so making sure you do those things are always justifiable and always easily to explain away, and obviously easy to submit to an insurance company. The next step is to clearly identifying what the scope of the actual damage is and making sure that you're supporting those issues. More so today than ever before, it's very important that you have an amazing amount of data and information supporting the efforts it takes to mitigate and also repair. The justification for it is what the insurance companies are looking for. And even when they are given it or presented it, we're seeing insurance companies choose all kinds of wacky reasons as to why they don't owe all of it, some of it, or any of it at any point in time during the claims process. So make sure you take a very, very close look at your policy conditions, but also making sure that your contractors, your staff, your board, your managers, everybody is aware of the situation. There's communication going out, but also documenting the situation in progress photos of the situation and documenting, diarying who you're speaking to, what they're saying, why they're telling you this. But as a board member or as a property manager, even those that have experience in insurance, as a lawyer, as a business person, don't act as if you are an expert. It is information that's being given to you by people working for you that you're paying on your behest to mitigate these things. This is in their words. This is what they're telling you. You can use your experience to help navigate and identify areas where someone may be taking advantage of the situation. But when assessing these scope and issue of your property, it's important that you collect all the data information, evaluate it, and properly communicate that to the insurance company. But the real problem that we often see with these hurricane claims is the type of notice that's actually given to the insurance company, which leads to the problem. And going back to my first point regarding the endorsements and the notice and the requirement in that nuanced policy, I would broadly state this, that a lot of associations and their boards and their property managers are trained to think or educated to think that the first line of offense in making a claim is actually noticing their broker. But I will tell you again, look closely at your policy, and what you'll notice is that the notice requirement in commercial policy sold to community associations I haven't yet to see one that is different than this, specifically states that the notice has to either go directly to the insurance company and or to a third party administrator or adjuster that's been written into the policy, not to the broker. Why that's important is that as we all can play the game of telephone and things get lost in translation and information, sometimes brokers get overwhelmed. They ask you to fill out a court form. All of these things are unnecessary nor required pursuant to the policy. So issues we see with regards to handling repairs and waiting for the insurance company to give notice usually relates back to the notice, how it was given, the reserve that was set on it, the type of damages that were reported, and usually is through a game of telephone. They called the broker's busy dealing with 15, 20, 100 other claims, doesn't give accurate information to the insurance company. Oh, by the way, that's on you, the insured, the association, for failing to comply with the policy and giving requisite notice to the actual party it says in the contract it needs to go to. And you know what? We're not going to pay your claim. And that's oftentimes what we see happen here. So notice is really the third most important thing. So reviewing the policy, understanding what your duties in the event of a loss are, making sure that you have competent professionals working on your behalf, providing you the data information that you need and documented in a way that actually supports the claims that are being made. And the third thing is that notice, making sure that you've given the proper notice. And notice isn't just the initial notice of the claim, which, by the way, statistically speaking, is usually where most claims result in denial or underpayment of a loss. But it's also if you engage with the KW claims team, what statistically speaking, you will receive a significantly better benefit in your policy and handling of those losses. So notice can go to how you recover, when you recover, how much you recover, and many other nuances to it, and also less stress. Okay, making sure that you have competent professionals there that are handling or supporting you in that notice, and the notice is going to the requisite parties in the process is also super important and tantamount to a positive claim experience. Anything that you can avoid that may affect the claim, going too fast, too soon in the process. I understand the desire to get back to life as it once was before the storm, but unfortunately, you do have the obligation to prove your damages. Okay, and if you have an obligation to prove your damages, if you understand the fundamentals of insurance, really what you should be doing is mitigating your damages, stop, evaluating the loss, understanding what the full value of your claim is, both mitigation and reconstruction, what it's going to take, the scope of the loss, as we call it, or this method of repairs, another nuance, nomenclature in an insurance company, right? The method of repair, the scope of the loss, understanding those concepts, recovering the money that you're entitled to, and recovering is not meaning rebuilding. That's the next step, actually. You recover the money you're entitled to, you engage with competent contractors to actually do the rebuilding for you, and then you start the rebuilding process. Most people skip from the notice to the rebuilding, and they miss everything in between. And that's where we see a lot of claims get denied, underpaid, delayed in the process when dealing, particularly after a storm. Within the first 4 months following a storm, what happens to the cost of materials and labor? It skyrockets, statistically super high. Everybody's running, everybody's buying equipment, labor, trying to lock it all in it. And then what happens is the curve, it starts to fall, goes back to market rate. So you got to be careful if you don't fall victim to price gouging and just in this hypersensitive desire to make repairs too soon.
Very good point. Now, who's responsible for calling the insurance? Should it be the property manager? Should it be the board president? Or do we contact Dan Odas and his team and they walk us through it? I mean, what is your recommended approach?
It's a great question. You first need to take a step back and understand your role as a board member and or a property manager as fiduciaries, right? You need to protect the financial interest of your association and making sure that they're making the right choices, right? And when we're talking about insurance, it's a financial tool. In fact, insurance is categorically a financial service, right? It's making sure that it's there to make you whole financially. It's not to give you the sticks and bricks, it's to give you the value of those sticks and bricks back to replace them and put you in a pre-loss condition financially. So we're talking about a very sensitive issue here. Most people don't understand the concept of it, of the role players in it. And so if you identify the role players, who your broker is and what their role is as a Most of them are 220 license in the state of Florida. They're there to sell you insurance, not manage claims. In fact, this says nothing about claims in their actual licensing. I'm also a 220 license. There's also professionals out there, 320 license, which are public adjusters. They're really the only licensed professionals under the state of Florida law that can represent your interest at the onset of a loss, or a duly licensed attorney that is acting as a public adjuster. Then they have to conform with the public adjusting laws as well. And so what we like to tell associations frequently is that contact the claims team of KW and we'll walk you through the process, whether it's through a contract and they're contracting our services and assisting you. And we can talk about how that all works and the cost of those different things. But that is truly the only way that you're going to make sure that you're protecting the financial interest of your association. Just like you're going to hire an owner's rep if you're doing a construction project, or a general contractor if you're going to do that construction, or engage a lawyer to deal with a legal issue, or an accountant to deal with filing taxes. The only claims professionals out there, there are claims professionals out there that only handle claims. And if you're not engaging a claims professional, I beg the question of most attorneys, and I've challenged them on this on other panels and everything else, is how am I protecting the financial interests of my unit owners as a board member if I'm not engaging in those that are licensed specifically to do that? And there's plenty of statistics out there. There's one, a report just came out of Texas, basically said, if you hire the representative to handle your claim, 98% of the time you receive more money than those that don't. In the state of Florida, they actually did a study which showed that if you engage a representative at the onset of a hurricane claim, you receive between 500 to 700% more than those that don't. It's not because you're taking advantage of the situation. It's because you understand how to navigate this process. And going back to the last question that was asked, there's so many nuances and issues and pitfalls in this process that your lawyer, your broker, or any other professional out there is not going to be aware of.
Okay, so communication is key. That's what it sounds like. Having a smooth hurricane season means proper communication between management, boards, insurance, vendors, partners, everybody from what it sounds like. So
Absolutely.
Moving on, I know we've received some good questions that have already been answered. So Marcia from Arventura, thank you. Brenda from Daytona. We have about 5 minutes left, so we are going to start wrapping it up. Sherwin, any closing remarks that you may have?
Absolutely. So I think when we are preparing for hurricane, part of the item, as I said before, understanding your building, understand how your building operates. Once the operators of the building are very in the know of how it operates, you can also review how to shut it down. These are critical components. If we don't shut down properly or understand how that process should be undertaken, you could actually create more costs and delay in bringing the building back up to operational standpoint. So we need to make sure we understand those items. It also safeguard the equipment from damage. Remember that, as Daniel mentioned, prices will go up during a hurricane. So if we do a good shutdown, it will mitigate the amount of costs or repairs that we may need to undertake afterwards. And downtime. For instance, most of your building have redundancy, maybe taking half of the system offline. So that when we are coming back online, we have at least half of the building to operate. I want us to take it offline, meaning completely disconnect from any electrical source, so we're not creating any type of short. Understanding the supplies, it could be water, it could be flashlights. All of those components are going to be critical as we go into this type of season. Remember, there are storms that happen upon us without notice. There was one that occurred where we were flooded in Broward, and it was an overnight event that just came out of nowhere. Those type of storms, if you're not prepared to deal with them, you will be in a very bad shape coming out of them, or dealing with the aftermath of which you did not prepare properly. So having those things in mind and utilizing history of what occurred in your area will help you be better prepared and better deal with those occurrences. That's it from me. Thank you.
Thank you, Sherwin. Dan, we got another question here that it's for you. From my experience, in the recent storms, we started to see individuals knock on doors, help us navigate our claims. What advice can you give us, whether we use these individuals or is there somebody else we should call? I mean,
Great question.
I know who I would call, Dan, but
Yeah,
but it is a valid question because
it's a very
let's
valid
face it,
question. Yeah.
there's
No
a
one
lot
can
of
be
movement going on after a storm.
not everybody can be everywhere. And I'll answer that question. I want to piggyback off of Sherwin just for 1 second, if you don't mind, Jordan.
Go ahead.
And make a comment regarding system shutdowns. Sherwin did a great job explaining and going into some of the details of it. As it relates to mechanical losses that occur following a storm, just understand that when that mechanical system gets turned back on and that short occurs, using Sherwin's word, we describe it differently, and the mechanical failure or the equipment breakdown occurs, that's actually your date of loss. It's not the date of the storm. And we see a lot of people pervert that and get that confused when they report the claim to their equipment breakdown policy, or their boiler machinery, whatever they use a couple different names for it. Oftentimes they'll use the date of the hurricane when they shut it down, but or when the storm hit, and unfortunately confuse the actual date of loss. The loss occurred when that system failed, not when you turned it off to prevent the failure. Okay, so just very important, and could be hundreds of thousands of dollars or a multi-million-dollar issue that I just mentioned right there. We often see, and that applies to elevators, pumps, boiler machineries, generators. We've seen some generators get damaged by some storm situation, high winds and debris. So just keep that in mind. The date that it fails is your date of loss when dealing with a mechanical claim. Answering George's question. A lot of people knocking on doors, a lot of people out there. Everybody can't be everywhere. I wish I could help all of you all at once, and often be everywhere we can be. That's a great way. A great way to ensure to increase your hit rate of getting us in front of you, the KW's claim team, is to contact us ahead of time. Allow us the opportunity to talk with your board, your unit owners, invite us to speak, have your property manager reach out to us, talk about information that you might need from us ahead of time, just like you would with your mitigation contractors, just like you would with Sherwin's team. Reach out to us. All our information is there. We are a service offering of KW. We want to make sure that you have access to it. It's an additional service. We want to make sure that there's operational efficiencies, that we're consistent with everything, reducing risk. We are a trusted resource, and we add a lot of value to associations often when doing this process. As you can tell here, we are a subject matter expert when it particularly comes to claims, property-related losses, whether they're under your building policy or your flood policy or your equipment breakdown, D&O type claims, any sort of claim like that. Now, when it comes to workman comp, health, life, or death, or dying, not our bag. But anything related to real property issues, make sure you reach out to us. There's a lot of people out there knocking on doors. Obviously, people try to take advantage of when you're at your worst. They want to take advantage of you, and unfortunately, humanity is usually at its worst. So be cautious. There is a lot of licensing information that's easily available online. The Department of Financial Services, I recommend that you check it. Not only check to see that their licenses, when did they get licensed, and what kind of license are they holding. There are strict laws against contractors being public adjusters or offering claim services. Very, very strict language around that. There is lawyers. Lawyers love to jump out there and say, "Oh, we have these people, or we can do this." That's your nuclear option. You're going to posture for defense. There's a lot of reasons why that's not in your best interest to jump to your lawyer or the lawyer's best friend and dealing with the situation. And I will say most certainly the insurance companies will immediately posture. There's also this nuanced thing where everything that they do and everything communication will suddenly become work product privileged, and they'll clam up. Oftentimes get shifted into another department, and it doesn't matter what the reserve is set up. Guess what? The claims process is almost certainly going to take longer. This is a cooperative process, but it's good information in, good information out. Bad information in, bad information out. It's going to lead to long delays. It's going to lead to posturing. It's going to lead to conflicts and interests. And so we want to make sure that we are perfectly aligned with you. And that's certainly where we are. KW is certainly aligned with its board members and unit owners and making sure that their interests are protected. That's what the claims team here at KW is intended to do. Reach out to us and we'll sit down and talk to you about all the intricacies of what we can do and how we can do it. Get involved in Sherwin's, pre-planning process or in dealing with some planning on the ground as far as what we can do and what you need to do after a loss, and go through some of those scenarios with you. Again, we've represented like thousands of community associations, and we've handled more than $1 billion worth of loss and damage over the last 15 plus years. So I can assure you our team is equipped to get out there and do it.
Perfect. Thank you, Dan and Sherwin, for joining. And thank you for all the attendees that joined today's sessions. If you're interested in joining KWPMC's monthly webinars, subscribe today and stay in the know. Thank you, everybody, and have a wonderful rest of the day.
Thank you.